This is the BBC.
Hello, my guests today are the novelist and commentator Gore Vidal, whose new novel, The Smithsonian Institution, is published this week. His historical novels educate America, his puckish novels, such as Myra Breckenridge and this one, delight us all, and his essays, Virgin Island is a new collection in paperback, emanate from a man whom some say, and I agree, is the best president America never had. And historian and politician Alan Clark MP, whose history of the Conservative Party this century has just been published. Since the Donkeys in 1961, his histories have often been thought controversial. He is also famous for his bare-knuckled diaries and noted for, let us say, a certain independence of opinion. Gore Vidal, in your essays, the new collection Virgin Islands, you refer to Plato's view of the cyclical nature of human society, the way it evolved. And you go to the Neapolitan scholar Vico, and you talk about society going from a theocracy to an aristocracy to a tyranny and then into a time of chaos. And you characterise our time as a time of chaos. That's the title of the essay. How would you characterise, why do you think of this as chaos, and how do you characterise the chaos in which you see us today?
Well, we're sort of at the end of the American imperium, and we're at the end of the nation state. Everybody's sick of that. And if Vico, working from Plato's Republic, is right, we're about to enter a new phase, or we're in it now, which is chaos, in which the future arrangements are not very clear. We had a Speaker of the House of Representatives in the 19th century who was so politically reactionary that they said if God had asked him his opinion of creation, he would have voted for chaos. Well, I'm afraid I'm in his position. I like chaos. And I dread the coming centrifugal forces that will be uniting Europe, will be uniting, I don't know what they'll do with the American empire. But you see the centrifugal thing going on, which is the wish of the banks, let us say, in regard to a European monetary unit. Then simultaneously, Yugoslavia, Soviet Union, practically every country, Scotland, you see people wanting to get out from under nation states and do their own thing. Well, I rather like that pluralism.
There are two things I'd like to say there before I talk to Alan Clark. One is, does the cyclical nature assumes that things will go on going on, and yet you're deeply pessimistic about that happening because of the presence of the discovery of the nuclear bomb. So just because we were cyclical before, are we going to continue to be cyclical? Is it going to go in this nice and nasty for a lot of people, but this progression, that's one thing.
Well, now we move, I'm happy you brought that up, to the Hindus. Now the Hindus are always on my mind, and they think that creation ends in conflagration, and then the cycle begins all over again. Presumably a few monkeys that have survived the great smash-up will evolve into a new human race. We don't know what's going to happen. All I know is the dream of Helmut Kohl of creating a united Europe based upon the Deutschmark, which would then change its name and nature, scares me to death. To have a common currency and bank with no parliament to oversee it, with no one to control it, and the kind of world mess going on economically. I'm very frightened of what's happening with money. Forget the cycles of whether the human race will survive. Will the currency survive this great shift in order that Mr. Kohl be thought of as Bismarck too?
But you're very much in favour of things falling apart, as you've said, with chaos. And yet, and you refer to the Soviet Union wanting to split away, the Yugoslavia splitting up. But while that's happening, that's resulting in extremely bitter, savage, apparently uncontrollable wars. What's good about that?
I would much rather have some small Balkan wars. No matter how awful
not if you're living there, you wouldn't, would you?
No, I wouldn't. But on the other hand, if we didn't have CNN, we wouldn't know about them at all. Isn't that better than having the world wars that we used to have?
I'd rather not have CNN and not have a war. I don't think there's a balance there.
I don't think there's any balance in the human being. They must have their wars. That has been the nature of our species from the very beginning, territorial wars. And it doesn't seem to be stopping. Everybody wants the United States to step in and be world policemen. I mean, we can't even police our own country, much less go around the world trying to regulate Southeast Asia. No, I'm for letting every country do its own thing, and if they want to have a civil war with the people next door, there are at least 1,000 of them going on, but because the people are black or yellow or green or brown, we're not interested. But those blonde, blue-eyed Balkans who get us into such trouble, thank you, 1914, I'm for leaving them alone.
Alan Clark, what do you think of this view that we are in a time of chaos and that's a good thing, according to Gore Vidal? He likes to sort of swim in this ocean.
Yes, I mean, I think chaos, the trouble about chaos is that the next stage is a revival of authoritarianism to
well, that is what
discipline.
Vico and Plato both said.
And
yeah.
what I fear, too, the theocratic state.
Yeah, well, you just got to love that. But the trouble is the chaos is not global. The chaos is confined much more to the United States imperium, certainly, and to the soft countries of the West. And the barbarians, of whom there are a great many, and who are acquiring various types of weaponry almost on a par with our own, are, to a certain extent, they're more disciplined, they're more motivated, and they're certainly more aggressive. And if we let chaos degenerate too far, we may find that it becomes as unpleasant as the little wars which as Gore rightly says, are covered just by CNN at the moment.
When you say the barbarians, you mean small countries now able to afford nuclear weapons?
Well, they're not
That's
so
what you're
small.
talking about.
Some of them have enormous populations.
Yes.
I mean, there are the standard sort of beggy countries like Persia and China
And 1 billion Muslims.
Exactly, the Muslims and the anyone you like, North Korea. All these countries have, in their different ways, are striving for one thing at the expense of living standards of their people, and that is sophisticated weapons of mass destruction.
And so in that sense, given the way you put that argument, you're coming over as very pessimistic indeed.
Well, pessimism, I mean, you know, the time scale is very long. If you're a historian, you regard all time scales as very long. And I mean, there may be a bad patch coming, but the trouble about survival under really apocalyptic conditions is, I mean, Gore said a few monkeys may survive. It tends to be always the lower forms of life, you know, flies, sharks, you know, I somehow feel that what life will survive on this planet will not be the sophisticated intellectuals in Britain and the United States. They'll be wiped out.
You, in your books, you give an awful lot of presence and power and authority to individuals. And in your book about the history of the Conservative Party, you talk about individuals who could have, in this country, could have done something different about the start of the Second World War, for instance. But just on that idea of individuals, do you think that, given what you've said and what Gore Vidal said, Alan Clark, do you think that any individuals around can do anything positive about recharging, redirecting this situation? Or is it all a mass drift towards that anyway, sort of Marxist mass drift that we can't do anything about?
It's very hard to tell. I mean, it's easier to identify the individuals with hindsight when you look at the historic pattern that developed, and then you can try and isolate points where we went wrong and so on. Clearly, the most powerful individual, the one who has the most leverage, is the President of the United States. But it's unfair to judge them on a day-to-day basis.
But you do say in your book that you do talk about individuals in this country. Let's take the beginning of the Second World War, who could have prevented Britain going into the Second World War, something which you think might have been a very good thing. Do you think that was really possible?
Yes, it was. Curiously, it was much more important that we shouldn't have got into the First World War,
Yeah.
of which the Second was a kind of continuation. But the trouble about the Second World War was that it was a completely idiotic concept for Britain to think that it could defend Poland against the Germans. It's that the mathematics and the balance sheet simply didn't work out. We were going to lose. And so anybody who had their head screwed on could see that and should have tried to work out a solution. The trouble was that the Nazis and Hitler were so odious and so difficult to deal with and so unreliable that the deal didn't ever really take shape, and any politician who tried to bring it about was discredited. It was discredited in a domestic context.
But just to see how an individual can sort of affect this sort of torrent of history that goes on, do you think had Churchill's voice been defeated in 1939, we would have taken a different course which have led... I mean, Gore Vidal's new novel is full of alternative possibilities of American history, but our history would have been... It could have been different, or were we inevitably going to go into that war once Hitler got cracking with his imperial march to the east?
No, I don't think Churchill counted for so much in 1939, although he was waiting in the wings, and he scared Chamberlain all the time about what might happen. I think if Halifax had been chosen instead of Churchill, and you must remember that the court wanted Halifax, the civil service wanted Halifax, the Tory party wanted Halifax, and the only reason that Halifax stood down and let Churchill take it was because he calculated that Churchill would make such a muck of things that after a bit they'd have to send for Halifax. Huge personal miscalculation, of course. But if he had gone for it, I think we would have made peace, a very bad peace. It would have just been a kind of auditor's, bankrupt deal.
This rather accords with your view, Gore Vidal, which you inherited from your grandfather, who was a great influence on your life in Washington, and a great man in many, many ways himself. But you said your grandfather said, quote, "No foreign war was worth the life of any American," unquote. You add, when you quote that, "Neither do I." You hold to that?
Yes. We started the United States to get away from wicked old Europe. That we might be wicked on our own terms toward other people, something else again, but we wanted to stay out. Apropos England and the Second World War, I have a very perverse British friend who blames your entry into World War II on Jenny Jerome. Had that woman been a better mother to Winston, you could have avoided that war and the peace, the intolerable peace. It was to be the peace of the desert. No, the First World War, had there been a fair vote in the United States, the people would have voted 2 or maybe 3 to 1 against coming in on the side of the Allies. There was a lot of pro-German sentiment, too, in the country. So in the Smithsonian Institution, my young character goes back into time to try and keep Woodrow Wilson from becoming president. Had he not been president, a great Anglophile, and in thrall to the banks. In 1914, when Asquith ran out of money, rather idly one day, and had to finance the war, he went to Wall Street, and he went to J.P. Morgan, and Morgan supported the pound. After about a year of this, by 1915, J.P. Morgan went to President Wilson and said, "Look, I'm just one banker. I'm supporting the largest world currency there is. I can't go on much longer. We're going to have to get into this war or show some support for England." And that really is how it happened.
That's lovely foreshortening. I mean, I love the sequence and the argument. It's shot full of kind of presumptions, which...
About going broke in 1914, because that's when the money power shifted from London to New York.
Not as soon as that, no. The curious thing is in 1914, in the run-up to the war, the pound increased in value on the foreign exchanges to a dangerous extent because it was a currency of refuge. In 1939, in the run-up to war, people were selling pounds as fast as they could, and exchange control had to be put in, on the date we declared war. I think that what this illustrates is that actually there was a point at which the British Empire could still have got out of that entanglement and would have retained its prosperity, its social structure, its omnipotence, really.
This is World War II.
No, this is World War I.
World War I. Yes.
No, World War II, no. World War II, we started off practically bust, and with the whole military balance sheet hideously against us. And then if the United States had not come in, I suppose in the end we'd have been worn out. I mean, the Russians have played a big part in this too.
But you do come back to Alan Clark. You do come back to individuals, which is interesting. I'm trying to get something going between individuals and this idea of the inevitable cyclical nature, which Gore Vidal runs through that one of his essays. But you say, a reviewer of your book said it's a well-sustained critique of the guilty men whom the author believes first threw away the empire and then tried to chuck the British nation-state. So you think this was in the hands of a few people who they did that, whatever, as it were, the forces of history were, America taking over in power and Russia growing in its own way and fascism growing in Germany, these few people, I'm just interested to know, do you think that they
Yes, I mean, I think this was a great endemic fault of the Conservative Party through that period, which was that it believed that its own perpetuation in power was in the national interest, and therefore what appeared to be the national interest, on Rousseau's distinction between the free will and the real will, what appeared to be in the national interest could be subordinated to the more benign concept of perpetuating the Conservative Party in power. So that meant that you actually got a lot of bad decisions were made. And when these accumulated, the country actually got steadily weaker, and that is the history of the second half of this century.
But you regret the decline of the empire.
But of course I regret it.
And the decline of the nation state.
Of course I regret it, because I'm an old-fashioned conservative, and I've never had to, personally, to weigh the balance of remaining in power and what should be the national interest, and I'm quite clear in my mind what was.
Gore Vidal, what about the end of the empire? You talk a lot about the end of the American empire. What about Alan Clark's view of the end of the British empire and the nation state? The damage to the nation state?
He likes it, and I'm not British, so I don't know that I have much of a view of it. I see that history passed over to us, the world empire, and we're the first people to have had a proper global one, thanks to machinery, technology, fax machines, and so on. That we have one that we don't really know what to do with. It's very expensive. We're $5.5 trillion into debt for armaments. We have no national health service. We have nothing. The people get nothing back for the taxes they pay, except this extraordinary swollen military budget. It's wrecked us, and we have got nothing back from it. Now it's very hollow. We're a bit like Britain was. I was in front of Downing Street, September 2nd, 1939, as a schoolboy. Neville Chamberlain came out to go to the House of Commons to say, war is almost here, and it came the next day. And I have sort of that feeling about the United States now, when I stand in front of the White House, which you can't because people are terrified somebody will blow it up, so the police ask you to move on. But I rather have the feeling that we are constantly thundering our orders. I mean, picking Madeleine Albright from Prague as our Secretary of State. I mean, this wet hen flapping about, giving orders to the Middle East, giving orders, and nobody pays any attention. And the president otherwise engaged. I mean, it's ludicrous.
Yeah, I think the trouble is it's the kicking sand, the old Charles Atlas advertisement, isn't it? I mean, if...
the 900-pound weakling in our case.
The 900-pound weakling, you see. If he has sand kicked at him by the Serbs...
There are one or two people who might not pick up this reference of Charles Atlas.
Yeah.
Never mind.
But anyway, well, I mean, this was an advertisement.
Nine-stone weakling, bodybuilding.
You see, and the real... You can explain that, Malvin, in a second. But the real point is if someone is kind of heavy-duty is giving trouble, they don't really like to do anything much about it. And this is a classic example of what's going on in Iraq, where the UN weapons inspectors have just simply packed up, really. They've reported all the breaches. They've reported the fact that Saddam Hussein is continuing to make all these weapons. And where are the B-52s? You know, the real exercise of US power is already atrophied, and it's only taking place in very minor concept.
You regret you think that the British nation state has been damaged in its fabric, you say, and you think that is very regrettable. So you admire the power of a nation state. What do you find in that to admire? It is not a fashionable view now. So what would you say? What do you find to admire?
I'm not bothered about fashion.
I wouldn't dream for a second. I would never accuse you of that.
Yeah, is it still built into people's instinct? And yes, it is, because the nation state is what should give them security. It's what gives them self-esteem. It's what gives them, or what sustains them in making sacrifices. I mean, Gore Vidal would be able to estimate whether the extent... I mean, the Russians should switch. The Russians loved Stalin. They were proud of Stalin. They will tell you what a wonderful time it was under Stalin, because the whole world was frightened of them. And you can talk to any Russian about that, and they hack up that. And this is something that the nation state will give to its subjects. And once it starts disintegrating into a lot of focus groups and and kind of little regional assemblies, it loses the inherent strength, which is based in history, which is based in power, which is buried deep in people's psyche, and which is actually the most valuable political force that there is.
Do you find that in America, Gore Vidal? Would you?
No,
would you
I don't find it, because we're so different. You are an island and more homogeneous, and it was a joint venture, England incorporated, and we are a continent. And we didn't want a highly concentrated nation state. We didn't want a federal capital. We didn't want a standing army. And it was Abraham Lincoln who tore the thing to pieces. And in many ways, he was the villain of our republic, because he decided the Civil War was not about slavery.
You're making a dummy in your new novel.
It's a dummy, yes. He's had a concussion. No, he had a mystical view of the Union, which nobody else had. We had regions, and each region was the size of a European country or larger. And we liked this loose confederation. The Articles of Confederation began as in Lincoln. Through this, the first modern war, 600,000 young men were killed. It was the bloodiest thing the world had seen at that time. And out of it came a highly concentrated federal state, which was by no means the dream ever of the occupants of the states of the United States.
In a sense, it might have been old Europe striking back. But can I move to something you've said, Gore Vidal? Politics is everything. Everything is political. You've run for Congress. You've taken a great interest in politics. You're a voice in politics of your country. And yet you've also written recently, we're not allowed to discuss politics anymore in the USA. All we have are personalities and sex. Do you think the effect of personalities and sex is substantially getting in the way of any useful political discussion process in the States, or even here?
Well, discussion has been closed by the corporations who own the country. The only political debate of any importance is who raises what money from whom, to give to whom, for what, taxes, revenues, and the infrastructure, as they call it, of the state itself. We're not allowed to talk about that, because the Congress is filled with people who are chosen by corporations, and they represent the corporations. They are to see that the corporations pay minimal tax on their profits and so on. So there is no representation for the people at large, and that's why half of them never vote. They have given up. They're much smarter than the media, which also belongs indeed to the corporations, are very disappointed in the American people, particularly over the Clinton nonsense. Well, he tried to do politics in 1993. He tried to give us a national health service, which every civilized country has, but we're not allowed. The insurance companies, together with the pharmaceuticals, together with elements of the AMA, the doctors, said, "You are trespassing. You're only a lawyer that we put in the White House. You're going to tax us? You're going to remove 1/3 of our revenues, which go to the insurance companies, for nothing." So they said, well, we'll take care of that legislation, and they did. Then they said, we're going to take care of you. And it's not because we don't like you, Bill and Hillary. We're sending a message to any politician in the United States. You try to do something for the people at large, and you will end up like the Clintons.
I love that. I mean, I simply, I can never resist a sort of king-size conspiracy theory, particularly put with such a beautiful, lucid, sequential argument as that.
But do you agree with this?
Well, I mean, this is, it depends what sort of society you live in, but you could say that the Nazi Party dominated Germany to the extent that the corporations dominated the United States. Certainly the Communist Party, during the communist period, played exactly the same role. It made and broke people. You couldn't move without its permission. It was impossible to exercise any judgment without referring to
But a conspiracy is still a conspiracy.
But can we get back to...
I don't dispute it.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting that what Gore said actually links very much with what I said at the top of the programme, but by going for the individual and trivialising the individual, as both of you have written and believe about Clinton, and I agree with both of you on this, by trivialising that, you're thereby trivialising politics and the political process. in the United States. Do you think this is deliberate? Do you think this is happening?
No, I don't quite go for Gore theory as being a conspiracy. I think this is simply a function of the communications machine now, and the appetite for artificiality and image and impermanence and ephemerality and so on. And they can't get enough of it. I think the media have a huge... the media are very willing co-conspirators with any force that wants to destroy somebody else.
So sex is just being used as something to destroy somebody.
It's a diversion, but let me show exactly how that particular conspiracy worked, because I was involved in some of it. Anti-conspiracy. This is how it works. If you want to kill a health bill, which profits insurance companies, the piggy bank of the corporations and the pharmaceuticals and so on. Now, here's how the conspiracy worked. They set out, they took ads, $500 million, I am told, it couldn't be that much, but it was nearly that much, on television. And they went like this. It showed a worried couple. And this went all over the country. That's a conspiracy to put those ads on, to raise the money, to put them on, not kill the legislation. Harry, does this mean that we can't use kindly Dr. Haskins, who delivered our Buster Brown, our precious child? I'm afraid, Lorraine, it does. But, Harry, that's communism. Then the Sixth Symphony would go booming in the background. Well, you do 10,000 of those ads. That's a conspiracy to put them on. That's a conspiracy to get them out. And you've got everybody finally fearful of communism from the Clintons. Now, if that isn't a conspiracy, I don't know what is. Just raising the money.
Yeah, but just a minute. I mean, that may be true. But how is it that Clinton's ratings have obstinately stayed in the high 60s? Because if they thought he was a communist, I mean, I think he would suffer a bit, wouldn't he?
Gore sees the salvation of America in those who don't vote because they have more sense than not to vote. I'm
Yes.
paraphrasing. But they've also more sense than to take the allegations against Clinton seriously.
They don't,
So
the press is enormously upset with the American people, and they may very well kick them out and get another people to come in and take their place. I mean, the press is not being listened to. The hysteria of these columnists.
That is far the most agreeable aspect of the whole crisis, is the number of times we've had people in the press come on the screen and say, now look, he's really finished, and now just you watch.
By Friday he's gone.
By Friday he's gone, and so on. And then he's obstinately bobs up again, and he's still rated at 61%.
Because the people like him.
It's a very heartening reassertion of genuine popular feeling over those who are trying to tell them what they ought to be thinking.
Is this a sort of re-emergence of a good, healthy paganism that you would approve of, Gore Vidal, in your country?
I would simply say that in the maelstrom of chaos, I see a glitter of common sense in my fellow countrymen. But it was always there. They just have no way of expressing it politically.
Alan Clark, briefly, do you see this applying to this country?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I still believe that the common sense of the people, particularly their ability to pick and choose the items of news, so-called, are constantly being stuffed at them, will, in the end, get the better of the media.
Well, thanks very much to Alan Clark and Gore Vidal. That's all we have time for. Next week I'll be talking to Richard Dawkins and Ian McEwan. Thanks for listening.